She's the pushy broad from the Bronx, New York. Follow her voice, a straight dog is nice. She's a pushy broad from the Bronx, oh yeah. Don't be surprised if you wanna listen twice. Make decisions, find the right choice. Know yourself better, find your own voice. It's okay if you need help today, cause everybody needs a little push. From the pushy broad from the Bronx, New York.
Nation Talk Network listeners, my name is Ellen Stewart, and I am the pushy broad from the Bronx. Welcome to my show, Recovery Recharged, where we share advice and support from experts in addiction and recovery. I am crazy about this topic because it's personal to me. All right. There's a lot of stuff in recovery that's personal to me, but this in particular, and I'm extremely interested to know what's going on in this arena, and I'm sure you are too. We talk about addiction. We talk about all kinds of addiction, but this time we're going to talk about the legal, but still not harmless cannabis, marijuana. What's normal, what isn't normal, what the new normal is in today's world with everybody in the States having legalized dispensaries. I just traveled to Europe and came back, and it was available everywhere. Is it a problem? Isn't it a problem? I had to bring in an expert. So one of our collaborators from Caron Treatment Centers in Wernersville, Pennsylvania, one of the women that has been on my show before, Kate Appleman, who is an expert. We're going to explore the impact on marijuana legalization on society and what it is doing to our young people as well. And if you recall, Kate Appleman oversees clinical operations in Caron's Wernersville campus. She has joined Caron since 2002. She's held various clinical positions and leadership positions, but most recently, she's serving as the corporate director of clinical practice and professional development. So the pushy broad from the Bronx and Recovery Recharge is going to talk about pot on the air. And I'm going to do it with Kate Appleman. Good morning, Kate. How are you?
Well, it's good to see you.
Good to see you again, too. So let's just get into it, because I really want to know what's going on in the world of treatment. So now that marijuana has a very good chance of being legalized across the country, how do you see it impacting our society, and especially in the realm of dependence and medicine?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that a misconception has been that marijuana or cannabis is not addictive. And when I look at the changes in the marijuana landscape over the years, what is out there as far as cannabis today is very different from how some people have known it in the 70s and in the 80s. And there's just so many different aspects to it, from the legalization of it, the incredible potency of it, the routes in which you can get it into your body, and subsequently the mental health impacts and implications that come with it are very different as a result of some of those pieces. So in the midst of the legalization of it, we're just seeing issues around it more and more frequently in the treatment sector.
So, a lot of people compare it to alcohol in terms of its legality and its social acceptance. Tell me how you feel about the two things and where you see the similarities and where you see the differences.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So I think of it very similar to alcohol as well, right? Alcohol has been legalized for a very long period of time. And depending on how you use it, it can be very harmful. When you think about cannabis, it's very similar, that just because it's legal doesn't make it safe. So when we really think about the use of mood and mind altering chemicals, there are people that are able to have a drink, put it down, and not have any addictive symptoms related to it. There are also people that do the same thing with cannabis. So when we look at alcohol, there's a lot of similarities in that, in the sense that it can be used in a social setting. It's not always addictive. People do not always get addicted to it. And the truth is 1 out of 10 people do. So when we look at cannabis and alcohol, those are some of the similarities. Just because it's legal doesn't mean that it's necessarily healthy for you. Some of the differences that I think of between cannabis and alcohol is, if you're going to drink alcohol, you typically will know what it is that you're drinking. Typically, we can talk about some of the other scenarios where that's not accurate. But if you open up a beer, you know the alcohol content that's in that beer. If you have a bottle of wine in front of you, you know what the alcohol content is there. You don't always have that when it comes to cannabis. So when you think about edibles and vapes and the ways that we smoke it, like if you think about some of those pieces, you don't always know the potency. So you don't always know what you're getting yourself into. And one of the things that we'll talk about is it's not just about the potency, but the route of administration. The way that your body responds to the chemical has an unpredictability to it as well. So I think there's some similarities, but there are also some differences.
Okay, so you've mentioned a lot of really interesting things, and I have clients that tell me, I just smoke pot. That's all I do. And I know personally that even though that was my number one drug choice, and I'm sitting here now very freshly 39 years clean and sober, and still everybody out there, that if I catch a whiff of marijuana in the crowd, I'm stopping to say, oh my God, that's a nice smell. Okay. Mm-hmm. So no matter what, I agree with you. It doesn't matter what the substance is and whether or not it's legal. For an addict with an addictive brain, it's always a dangerous situation, no matter what it is. So let's talk a little bit about specifically cannabis use disorder. Is it more prevalent than people realize? How many people do you see in treatment? And tell me what the key signs and symptoms are.
So the prevalence is interesting. Last year was the first year that the use of cannabis really upticked to really competing with the use of alcohol, which I know that if you look at cannabis kind of overall, that's not a surprising thing. So the prevalence of it is absolutely there. And I think that there's a reciprocal relationship between it getting legalized and how much people are struggling with addiction to it. Again, to your point, just because it's legal doesn't mean that it's necessarily healthy for you. There's a couple of things. I think that when you talk about kind of mood and mind altering substances, it doesn't matter what the substance is. If you're addicted, you're going to have an issue with it. I think one of the other pieces that I really think about when I think about teens and young adults is when we look at some of the precursors that are in place that make a predictability of somebody becoming an addictive to something, we need to take some of those pieces into consideration as well. And whether that's adverse childhood experiences, if it's trauma, if it's people that are looking at a way to escape, to numb, to get outside of themselves, to not really have to experience their reality. When we have people that really struggle with that, it's easy for a mood and mind altering substance to come on board and to become a part of the norm, because there's a payoff to people. They're looking for something, right? They're looking for that change in feeling. Again, there's a lot of people that can use cannabis that may never get addicted to it. There are more people in the past year that identified using cannabis on a daily basis than people who identified using alcohol on a daily basis. So this is becoming more and more of an issue. As we look at a substance use disorder, a cannabis use disorder, according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5, which is how any mood disorder or mental health disorder is diagnosed, there are certain symptoms that come along with it being problematic, right? If you're smoking cannabis once and you put it down, you don't have any consequences, you go months without doing it again, do you have a cannabis use disorder? Likely not, unless there's something we're missing. But if you're somebody who has grown accustomed to needing it throughout activities of daily living, that's something to really think about. If there's a progression, I used to be able to get high off of X amount, and now it's taking me more to achieve a desired effect. That's another symptom of a cannabis use disorder. Continuing despite consequences. I have issues with it. I continue to do it despite the consequences. I continue to do it despite knowing it's going to make a physical or psychological problem worse. I intellectually know that depression or anxiety symptoms get worse with it, and I continue to do it anyway. Putting really important needs on the side as a result of it. My relationships are really important. The people close to me really struggle with my marijuana use, and I continue to do it despite it negatively impacting my relationships, my ability to be employable, my ability to play sports. If there's consequences that come with it and you're continuing to use it, that's one of the symptoms of a cannabis use disorder. And then historically, we haven't really looked at cannabis as something that has a physiological dependence to it. But the truth is, two of the other symptoms that come along with it are craving and withdrawal. So as we look at some of these elements, you don't have to have all of those in place to have a cannabis use disorder. But when you have a couple or more in place, it starts to raise red flags that it's problematic.
Certainly, when we talk about it, we can certainly link cannabis with, like you said, a pre-existing psychiatric condition. Are they escaping or withdrawing or suffering from a trauma that they want to numb out? There is no question. But also talking about the fact that you said there are cravings and withdrawals. And that's the thing that's really amazing about marijuana. What kind of withdrawals are you seeing? So if somebody really wants to stop, because this is an important point, and I have clients that are doing it constantly. What do you see in the withdrawal symptoms? What can they expect?
So the withdrawal symptoms, any withdrawal symptom from a chemical has its nuances, right? So we know that if we're using alcohol on a daily basis, when I stop using, the withdrawal symptoms will start to set in. Those happen pretty early on after you stop using. Things like benzodiazepines, your Klonopin, your Xanax, your Ativan, those have a longer half-life, so they stay in your system a little bit longer. So your withdrawal symptoms will continue on for a longer period of time. What we find with cannabis is if you're getting drug tested and you're a regular cannabis user, it's going to stay in your system for about 30 days because that's how long it takes for cannabis to go through your system and for your system to be able to process it. So what happens is while your urine drug screen is going to come up positive even weeks after you've used from the last time, if you're a regular user, your withdrawal symptoms actually continue and sometimes worsen about 30 days in. So what we end up seeing is people who are regularly smoking cannabis or regularly ingesting high levels of THC, and they stop and come into treatment. There's mood irregularity, there's agitation, discontentment, like a really hard time being able to kind of sit in your own skin. People talk about issues with sleep, sleep irregularity, trouble falling asleep and staying asleep. Food cravings are something that happen, again, early on. Then there's also post-acute withdrawal symptoms that are happening after you initially stop and your body is trying to kind of process the chemicals out of it. And your post-acute withdrawal symptoms are an inability to think clearly, continued craving, issues with memory, all of those pieces as your brain from kind of a neuro-restorative kind of vantage point is trying to get into recovery. It takes a while for your brain to process through the acute withdrawal symptoms that can last far past 30 days and into post-acute withdrawal symptoms that for some people, depending on what and how much they've used, can last up to 18 to 24 months.
I'm shocked. That's really
it's scary.
Amazing.
It's scary.
It's really, really scary considering, I just need to say to everybody out there, the stuff that you're getting, even from the dispensaries and the legalized stuff that you go in to buy, is not your grandma's marijuana, guys. It just isn't. It is completely different. So let's focus on brain development now, okay? And let's talk about how it interferes with brain development, which is why it is so lethal to adolescents and young adults.
Yeah. So, and when I think about brain development, I think about this phrase that we've all heard for years that that marijuana is a gateway drug. I just have to say that I've been around the field for 20 years, and I have heard that over and over and over again. Like, marijuana is a gateway drug. And what I'll say is there are people that will start using cannabis and go on to other chemicals. There's some truth in it. And the reality is cannabis, because of its potency, is bad enough in and of itself that it doesn't have to lead to other drugs to actually make it as problematic as it is. So I do want to say that, because I think that is a common misconception that that teens and that adults make about the use. And many times the use is focused on teen and young adults, when the reality is teen and young adults are not the only ones using it on a regular basis and having some consequences and problems as a result of it. When I think about brain development, I think that one of the messages that's really important for anyone as they're growing up is just wait as long as you can, right? Like, your brain isn't fully developed until you're 25, right? So your chances of becoming addicted to a mood and mind altering substance, when you start onboarding it at 12, 13, and 14, you have, it's not like a 1 in 10 chance that you're going to become addicted to something like cannabis. At that age, before the age of 18, it's actually 1 in 6. So if you put 6 people right next to each other under the age of 18, and they're starting to smoke marijuana, and it's not just a once and done, 1 out of 6 of them statistically will become addicted to it. We don't think about those things. And part of the reason for that is with adolescents, the last part of their brain to develop is their prefrontal cortex. So your prefrontal cortex is like your good parent. It's like the brakes and steering kind of section of life. It's all your executive functioning, your decision making, your weighing the pros and cons, your impulse control. All of those pieces are not fully developed until you're 25. That's when you think about brain development, like that's how long it takes. So when you start putting mood and mind altering substances on board that flood the limbic system, which is, if that feels good, I want to do it again. This is why teenagers don't always make the best decisions, right? That don't make sense to adults all the time. They're learning how to use that portion of their brain as they're exercising it. If you're putting mood and mind altering substances in there that feel amazing, chances are it's going to override their ability to make a rational decision not to do it. So hold off as long as you can so that you can at least look at, do you make an informed decision when you're actually an adult? Those are the things that kind of come to mind, that with teenagers, if you tell them no, they say thanks, yes. What are the other things that we want to put into place that don't make that a viable choice that even looks good? What does that look like for people? So those are some of the thoughts that come to mind for what it's worth.
Okay. So for parents out there, what do you suggest in terms of a strategy or approach, in an educational way to help delay the curiosity of drug use in the teenage and young adult years? What do you suggest?
So a couple of things. I think that the more you're able to have conversations with them without feeling like they're on the defensive, the more will come of it. And many times kids will actually be more willing to talk about things that their friends are doing than talk about the things that they're doing. So the ability to open up the conversation, that you acknowledge that things are out there, right? You acknowledge that there's the possibility that people are asking your kids if they want to use. Like, there's the possibility that they're being offered things. One of my sons is 14. He's a freshman in high school. having conversations with him, I know that he's offered things, right? Because I don't want to shame him for when he is. That happens sometimes, right? I think that, so being able to set the stage for some of those conversations, that it's a conversation, I think is really important. I think the other thing that comes to mind is there's a misconception that everyone does it, right? As parents, we hear that sometimes if our kids are starting to do, well, everyone does it. That's not true. If you look at some of the surveys that look at the amount of adolescents, freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior year that have never touched a substance, the percentages go up, but the percentages aren't huge, right? There are a lot of people that are in high school that are not touching substances. They're choosing not to do that. So when you have kids that are saying, but everyone does it, there are people that do it. There are people that become addicted to it. And there are some people that never choose to do it. Acknowledging that all of those pieces are out there, I think is really important. And also acknowledging that their job as adolescents is to be curious and explore things. That's their job. So if we can normalize that that's the job, we want to help acknowledge that you should be curious and you should be exploring things. What if it's not chemicals? What if it's sports? What if it's clubs? What if it's friends? What if it's hobbies? What if it's all of those other things? So am I in a position where I can help navigate them to some of those things that feel like they matter so that there's less space for this piece over here when it comes to chemicals filling in a gap?
So they don't have to do, and also understanding for everybody that they don't have to do this just to have a good time. It's not part of the party atmosphere. But unfortunately, through my generations, the hippie generations and the boomer generations going onward, sometimes young adults and teenagers are faced with their parents doing the same thing. And more and more marijuana is an acceptable drug. So what happens when you have a patient in treatment that is an adult and is battling marijuana use? Do you see that as someone coming in with a cannabis addiction only and as an older adult? Does that happen at Karen?
Yes. So cannabis use disorder, we see as a primary issue, as a primary use disorder. We also see people that come in with it as a secondary or tertiary, right? They come in and they believe that their alcohol consumption, because they just got their second DUI, is the problem, but they don't think that cannabis is the problem. So what we typically do is we'll meet them where they are and we'll acknowledge, okay, if you say alcohol is a problem, let's talk about alcohol being a problem. And then looking at the similarities of how many times the way that we use alcohol and the way that we use cannabis are very similar. We're using them for very similar reasons: to check out, to sleep, to manage stress, to manage whatever it is, right? To kind of take the edge off. So helping people to kind of understand the similarities, I think, is incredibly important. So yes, we're absolutely seeing it. We have people that come in that talk about it openly. We have people that come in that they don't necessarily talk about it in the beginning of treatment, but start to open up more about their use of it throughout the course of treatment, the safer that they feel here. Because the truth is, we're not going to shame them for it. We just want to acknowledge, like, that is a part of the picture. So let's talk about what's in it for you, right? Does that get you closer to or further away from who you want to be, what you're about, your values? What are you looking for in it? It's really important to have that open conversation so that the people that didn't necessarily talk about it up front in treatment, they have the ability and the space to be able to explore it. And sometimes to be able to explore their relationship with their medical marijuana card, right? Because we have people that come in here with opiate prescriptions and benzodiazepine prescriptions that a medical marijuana card is also a piece that they come in with. Let's explore what that's about for you and what you're looking for in continuing to use it.
Well, I want everybody out there to understand that cannabis use disorder is a real thing. And we have about 30 seconds left. I would like you to tell us some takeaways. If somebody is struggling with cannabis use, what do you suggest?
Yeah, I think that a couple of takeaways. One, just because it's legal doesn't make it healthy. I'll say that out loud. Just because it's legal doesn't make it healthy. just because cannabis has been perceived as natural in the past, that's not the case. And if you struggle with it, you're not the only one. There are people that are able to use it once and done. And there's people that use it beyond recreationally that have consequences as a result of it. So the misperception that it's not problematic, I think, is out there in society. And just, it's important to acknowledge that it is a disorder. People do struggle with it. And just like any other substance use disorder, people get into recovery from it and are able to really put some pieces into place to have other coping skills and to do other things in life that are important that sometimes cannabis keeps them away from.
Okay.
So what I would say is if you need help, I understand that. And that's part of what we do at Karen.
Fantastic. I am so glad to have you with us today. This is an extremely important topic. We'll be talking more and more and more. Kate Appleman, thank you so much. This is Ellen Stewart, the Pushy Broad from the Bronx, saying thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. This is Ellen Stewart, the Pushy Broad from the Bronx, saying thanks for listening, and remember, everybody needs a little push.
From the Pushy Broad from the Bronx, New York.